Hi, and Blizzard have announced a buff for Retribution Paladins. And no, I'm not talking about the ones that wasn't being announced for 7.3, which of course is going to be probably still a couple of months away, although I am going to talk about that as well to counterpoint this. I mean an actual buff that's going to be going live next reset. Now, we've been waiting for this for quite a while. I remember when Tomb of Sargerans launched, it was pretty clear that we were going to be looking pretty bad. Of course, Blizzard in those cases say, oh, well, you know, the Sims don't tell you everything. And I, of course, have sort of said that. It's very difficult to compare classes with Sims. But then when the data's live and it's, you know, week goes by and another week goes by and it's like, you know, do you know what? There's some fights where we're okay, but there's a lot of fights where we're not. We are not. And, you know, it's been so bad that there are top Retribution Paladins, who are playing other classes just to raid. Because they're not being taken, particularly for the latter bosses. Now, neither the buff that has been announced for 7.3 nor this one would help that, but I'm going to caution on that one. For the vast majority of us, we haven't got the same issue that those top rets have got, but more about that later. So the buff that was announced for 7.3, first of all, before I talk about next week's, is effectively to Mastery. Now, Mastery has been a problem for us all expansion. Blizzard have done pretty well with Retribution Paladins with secondary stats. They've all been fairly close together. So the huge issues that were affecting people, especially with Rings and Necks, which has such a high secondary stat budget, were not as bad for us, except where Mastery came in. Mastery has always sort of been behind, lagging behind. You have to have virtually no Mastery for it to get up to the point where you'd want some of it. And this was a bit of a disaster. I mean, when Tomb of Sargeras was coming out, it was actually looking quite good for a little while because one of our set bonuses, what is now the 2 set bonus, was actually going to favour Mastery. It was going to increase the effect that Mastery has, in effect, meaning that actually, do you know what, Haste and Mastery might be a thing again. And this has traditionally been the secondary stats that have been wanting for the past few years, Haste and Mastery. But no longer, and they changed that set bonus. They had a reason for it, which, you know, is reasonably valid. I don't agree with it, but I understand their reason for that. So, and then for me personally, see, I've always been okay with my gear. I've been quite fortunate in many ways and not having to have much mastery. I had like 19% mastery throughout most of Nighthold. Within a week and a half of Tomb of Sargeras coming out and updating my gear with Tomb of Sargeras gear, all of a sudden, certainly within a couple of weeks, I had about 30 or just over 30% mastery. So my mastery had increased by 50%. It was a disaster. Now I've been quite fortunate since, because I've got other pieces which have now been able to reduce my mastery to below 19% again. So all is good. But it's really negative that we have to try and avoid mastery to such an extent, because, I mean, for example, I'm wearing a 905 neck. Now it's got a socket, so that increases the value to a certain extent. I have a 930 neck though. It's got mastery on it, and you sim it, it's not an upgrade. It's not even close to being an upgrade. That's how bad the situation is. So when Blizzard earlier this week announced that we were going to be getting buffs to mastery, which is incidentally exactly what I asked for when we did the final boss interview a couple of weeks ago, Bay asked us at the end, what do we want Blizzard to change about Retribution Paladins? What's one thing you'd want them to change? And I straight away said, I want them to increase our mastery. Because to my mind, that's the easiest thing to change. All you have to do, and the way I was thinking of it, is all you have to do is increase the amount of the percent mastery we get from a certain amount of mastery rating. Now, Blizzard haven't done it that way. They've done it a different way. They've actually tuned the abilities mastery. Because remember what mastery does? Everyone just thinks of it in terms of it buffing our spenders if the target has the judgment debuff on it, but it also buffs judgment itself, and they've tuned those numbers. So they've done it in I suppose, a slightly more refined way than I was suggesting. But the upshot is that if they keep it as it is, and anything can change between now and 7.3, then actually mastery is not going to be a problem for us. In fact, we might actually quite like mastery. It's not going to be our best stat. Well, it might be, because of the fact if we've been shunning mastery by the time 7.3 comes out, our mastery might be far enough behind, say, crit and haste, probably not versatility, but crit and haste, that actually it does become desirable. So do what I always say, never throw away any high item level pieces. If you've got high item level pieces, keep them, because you never know. But I was a little annoyed that, although I was quite happy that it looked like they were addressing the mastery problems, I was a little annoyed that they weren't doing it straight away, because this is a change you could put in immediately. And we've been waiting for a change all the way through to Sargeras. It's been out for a few weeks now, and some classes were buffed straight away. And I was thinking, I've said before, people who've been following my channel will know that the reason why I thought Blizzard haven't made a change to us, even though we clearly have needed it, is because they were trying to tackle Crusade. And that is a complicated problem. That's not something you can do quickly. Now, it turns out that that is not the case. I'm not saying they're not thinking about Crusade, but it doesn't look like they're actively working on it. Because they've done the mastery change for 7.3, and now we'll come into it now. I'm taking my time. There's the buffs announced for next reset. Now, those buffs include Blade of Justice damage increased by 10%. In brackets there, it's saying unchanged in PvP. Not bothered about PvP on this channel. We're all about the PvE. So Blade of Justice is increased by 10%. Also, Crusader Strike damage increased by 10% as well. Now, when you run this through Simcraft and you look at the breakdown of abilities, you can see Blade of Justice, of course, is pretty much our highest damage ability. It's certainly one of our main highest damage abilities on single target. So that's a significant buff. Crusader Strike, on the other hand, is way at the bottom. So that's not so much of a buff. But, you know, we'll take anything we can get. Now, what does this actually translate as? Now, using my own character, I can only use my own character for this, of course. I ran, I did a Simcraft for single target, light movement, and by adding 10% to the Blade of Justice and Crusader Strike damage, I was getting an overall damage increase of just over 3%. So it's round about a 3% buff overall to single target. Now here's where, and I looked at this first of all, my initial reaction on this was, so what they're trying to do is increase our single target damage without increasing our AoE damage, because in theory that's what it would do. Blade of Justice is a single target ability, Crusader Strike is a single target ability. And maybe with the mastery, see, I was saying I wanted the mastery changes now because that's so easy to implement. And maybe Blizzard are thinking to themselves, we don't want to give them any more AoE damage because the mastery change would also buff our AoE, whereas these don't. But there's a couple of things about that, I would say. First of all, it's not like our AoE is off. There are several classes that are doing way more AoE damage than us. But also, because I know what some people think, they can think, okay, well, maybe there are some classes doing more AoE than you. But if their single target is worse than you, you're like somewhere in the middle. You do decent AoE, and all you need is with these changes to do decent single target as well. And you're halfway house, isn't that okay? Sure. But some of those classes that are doing way more AoE than us are also doing way more single target than us. So what I'm trying to say is, I think they could have made the mastery change, and even though that buffs our AoE, it's not going to make us stupid on AoE. You know, we're okay on AoE. We could be a bit better, and it's not overpowered. Then the next query is a lot of people looking at this and assuming that this Blade of Justice damage increased by 10% is also going to include Divine Hammer, because people will be saying to me, I know what you're thinking right now, well, Divine Hammer will be buffed as well, won't it? Not necessarily, no. Divine Hammer is a separate spell. Divine Hammer is not an upgrade to Blade of Justice, it replaces Blade of Justice, and that's where people get confused with it. But it is a totally separate spell. And there's form on this as well. They've done this before. Remember, you know, not only in Legion itself, but throughout the beta and alpha, whenever Blizzard have announced changes to Blade of Justice, if those changes include Divine Hammer, they have listed Divine Hammer separately as a spell that's going to benefit from any buff or suffer from any nerf. But they have done this before, I feel. I'm sure in the back of my mind, they have done this before where they've changed Blade of Justice, but not Divine Hammer. And I think that's what's happening here. Now, of course, it could be that they intend to buff Divine Hammer as well. And it's just because they've put this out last thing on a Friday from their point of view, which is why I'm not going to tweet and ask about it at the moment, because it'll just get lost in the weekend traffic on their Twitter account. Maybe I'll tweet on Monday and hopefully we can get some answers on that. I mean, actually, I suppose we could just wait, couldn't we? This is coming out for Wednesday. We could just wait for Wednesday and see if it's actually buffed our Divine Hammer or not. Well, I say Wednesday, Tuesday, actually, because North America will go live then. But, so there we are with the buffs that are coming and the buffs that are coming very, very soon. Will it actually improve things? I mean, the main problem we've got is Retribution Paladins. And I say we're talking about the very, very top ones. I do want to sort of caution anyone who is currently, let's say, on the very first Mythic bosses at the moment, or even working your way through Heroic, you should not concern yourself with the state of Retribution Paladins at the moment, because there is no problem. The problem comes from specific. Like, I have been on progress for the mythic boss we've done so far, apart from Desolate Host, and it wasn't because Rets are bad for Desolate Host. It was simply because I was busy when we were doing it, you know, so I wasn't able to make that raid. That's all it was to it. And I've been on all the others. I'm in on Mistress Assassine at the moment, so there is no big problem with Rets at the point at which I am. And if you're further behind me, there's no problem at all. The problems are going to come with Maiden. We don't add anything particularly, but we can be taken. We're not a millstone around anyone's neck on Maiden. We're just not stunning. But then Avatar is where the real problem comes, and then Kil'jaeden itself. On Mythic, not Heroic. We're brilliant on Kil'jaeden Heroic. And we're okay on Avatar as well, Heroic. It's just the Mythic where we're pretty bad. But what's bad about us is not our damage. Obviously, if the damage was stupendous, then yeah, okay, that compensates a little bit. But bear in mind, they are going to be making nerfs to those bosses. Now that certainly Avatar has been killed by a lot of raid groups, now top raids groups. So that could well be up for a nerf soonish, same as Mistress Assassine. Kil'jaeden probably not due for a nerf just yet because there are still top guilds trying to kill him. Although it's really bizarre that it's 5 days later and only one guild still has killed it. So what I'm saying is that for the vast majority of Retribution Paladins, by the time these fights are nerfed enough that you can basically take anyone, then it'll be fine. My thing is that this isn't going to change that. So any Retribution Paladins at the moment in a guild that's about to go into Mythic Avatar or Kil'jaeden, Retribution Paladin, this isn't going to improve our lot because our issues are not a little bit of it's 3% extra damage. That's not going to help us. So to be honest with you, I think as well the major buff is going to come with 7.3 because it's a bit like with Nighthold. You know, you had Nighthold. We were all right in Nighthold, by the way, but we had Nighthold, and then you had the patch 7.2 come out, and then that gave us all the new artifact traits, which boosted our power. The same sort of thing is coming with 7.3. We're getting the Netherlight Crucible, which is going to buff the effect of our artifacts effectively. We're getting another talent tree on our talent tree. So, you know, we are going to become more powerful, but then so will other classes, of course, to push you through those. But what I'm saying is, when that time comes, if it's a couple of months before you get onto Mythic Avatar and Kil'jaeden, the raid group as a whole will be so powerful that DPS checks will be made more easily. So the fact that our movement is so bad and the fact that we can't just ignore all these mechanics is not going to be a big deal. So I've taken quite a while over that one because there's quite a few things I wanted to talk about. But I did want to caution. I didn't want to sort of sky is falling type thing, especially when we've got a bit of a buff to celebrate. And although it's not a stupendous buff, it potentially is okay. It's all right. I mean, I looked at some of my logs from this week and added 3% on. What difference would it make? In most cases, not a great deal. But for some people, it may well make the difference, I suppose. And also, it's a perception thing. Any sort of buff has got to be welcomed at this time because I think people are getting this perception that Retribution Paladins are in a bad state. And it's not. We're just a little bit off. And that's all there is. But for the vast majority of guilds and the vast majority of Retribution Paladins, you know, we're fine. Player skill and ability and attitude can compensate for any shortfall in our damage at the moment. So anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, don't forget to subscribe for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.